Okay, Sal, it's all yours.
Okay, there we go. Um, I try to understand why people do what they do. Uh, and invariably, people rarely do what I expect them to do. I try, however, to understand why. Uh, it may be my expectations are utterly ridiculous, or there is something else at play that does not appear evident on the surface. And this is why I'm so interested in the brain. It helps in understanding human behaviors. I also find it interesting to contemplate that the world that we inhabit over millions, and not that we were around for millions and billions of years, but that the earth has been around for millions and billions of years. I like to think about that world. You see, what I have found is that in teaching history, it is very difficult for people to conceptually think about thousands of years, millions of years, billions of years. But the fact is that there is such a time span, and there were things that existed before now. Um, I find it that it's important for me in studying history to accept that the world didn't begin the day I was born. And so a lot has preceded me, and I study history to understand how events of today are direct products of yesterday. And so, in looking at the brain, I want to conceptually suggest that it starts developing millions of years ago. Then there are changes that come about, and new functions, new capacities are added to the brain. And more time goes by. And again, new things come about. We know what the brain does today, but is that what the brain did thousands of years ago? And so I want to highlight those differences because it suggests much about history. It has implications for history. Mind you, we watch people today with fully developed brains who use that capacity for warfare. Um, where when we go back to our ancestors, yes, the ape family had fights with other ape families, but they didn't organize armies to attack and kill. So it's just kind of, to me, important to recognize that even though we can look back on what we would consider more primitive existences, something came into our existence that made us much more lethal than what we had known for thousands and millions of years. We are, as I say, members of the ape family, and as we developed our own branch on the family tree, we had a brain that was very different from the brain we have today. Estimates range from 200 to 500 million years ago. Our oldest ancestor emerged in Africa. We had a brain, the reptile brain, that consisted of lobes that had specific tasks and responsibilities. These lobes were essential for survival. This lecture is going to be about lobes and limbics. This is the lobes and limbics class. I know that sounds terrible, but it's like that's going to be boring, but I think you'll see the significance of it as we go on. Somewhere around 120,000 years ago, after we had become an identifiable species, our brain had a makeover. It wasn't replaced, but new matter emerged that added to our capacity for performing tasks and responsibilities. This is known as the mammalian brain. This expanded brain gave us the limbic system. Our brain expanded again about 35,000 years ago as a new brain took shape, providing us with gray matter around the outer expanse of the brain, an abundance of neurons for processing information. Today's brain encompasses the brain stem, which is the old brain, which is where the lobes existed, in addition to the mammalian brain and the new brain. The mammalian brain gave us the limbic system. Didn't replace the lobes, it added two. And then came the new brain, which gives us the neocortex. This is the gray matter, neurons, ability to process lots of information. Each of us has not one, but three brains. About that whole brain, the Karen Armstrong, who's a historian about God and has studied a great deal about the brain, she tells us that each of us has not one, but three brains that coexist uneasily. In the deepest recess of our gray matter, we have an old brain that we inherited from the reptiles that struggled out of the primal slime 500 million years ago. The scientist Michio Kaku says, known as the reptilian brain, these are the oldest structures of the brain, governing basic animal functions, such as balance, breathing, digestion, heartbeat, and blood pressure. They also control behaviors such as fighting, hunting, mating, and territoriality, which are necessary for survival and reproduction. Reptilian brain can be traced back 500 million years, according to Kako. Let me get to that next one. This may be more detailed than you would like, but I want to highlight the functions and responsibility of brain parts so that we can see how our capabilities have changed over time. The old brain, the reptilian brain, came with four lobes in the neocortex. The parietal lobe controls sensory attention and body image, along with skilled movements and some aspects of language. Remember, going back millions of years, we didn't have, our species didn't have a language. We, could make grunts and groans and that kind of thing, and then language ultimately formed. So in the older brain, it has some aspects of language, but not as we think of it today. The occipital lobe processes visual information, an extremely important task for hunter-gatherers and for survival in the animal kingdom. The temporal lobe controls language, visual recognition, particularly face recognition, and selected emotions and feelings. And then we have the frontal lobe, which includes the prefrontal lobe, which has responsible for most rational thought. Damage here can impair one's ability to plan or to contemplate the future. As I indicated at the outset, these areas of the brain, their tasks and responsibilities, existed for millions of years. The condition of epilepsy is an insidious condition, and I want to look at what happens when epilepsy impacts the temporal lobe.
But what would happen if the emotions were to run out of control? What effect might an excess of emotion have on the way we interpret the world? John Sharon has temporal lobe epilepsy.
The seizures involve my person, and my soul and my spirit, all of it. When I get one of those feelings, though, my whole body just tingles and just, I'm like, that's that.
John's epileptic seizures are essentially an electrical storm in his temporal lobes, when a group of neurons starts firing at random, out of sync with the rest of his brain. Recently, John experienced one of his worst episodes to date. He'd gone out to the desert with a girlfriend, and they'd both got very drunk, with disastrous results. John was suddenly hit by a volley of seizures. Each one lasted about 5 minutes and involved violent convulsions that left him unconscious. Eventually, John managed to get a call through to his father, who drove out to the desert to bring him home.
On the way home, him and I just got into some philosophical, questions about everything, and I just would not shut up. Once I got on the way home, I was going and going. It was like I was wired.
It's basically an earthquake within the body. And like any earthquake, there are aftershocks. And like any earthquake that does damage, things have to be rebuilt. Things have to subside. Mainly what I deal with is the aftermath, particularly with this last episode. It was very much like stepping into a Salvador Dali painting. Okay, instantly everything was surreal. And that's, in essence, what his seizures are all about, the aftermath. Where it puts his brain, where it puts his memory, where it puts his mind, his thinking ability, everything else.
When John's seizures came to an end, he was exhausted, but he felt omnipotent.
I went running down the street screaming that I was God. And then this guy came out, and I was just like pelvic thrust at him and his wife, and I was like, "You want to effing bet I ain't God?"
And I said, literally, "You get back in here. What do you think you're doing? You're disturbing the neighbors, you're going to call the cops. What is this all about?"
I kind of just looked at him cool and calm and apologized to him, and I'm like, "No, no one's going to call the police." I didn't say this last part, but I'm thinking to myself, no one's going to call the police on God.
John had never been religious, yet the onset of his seizures triggered overwhelming spiritual feelings.
It has been known for a long time that some patients with seizures originating in the temporal lobes have intense religious auras, intense experience of God visiting them. Sometimes it's a personal God, sometimes it's a more diffuse feeling of being one with the cosmos. Everything seems suffused with meaning. The patient will say, "Finally, I see what it's all really about, doctor. I really understand God. I understand my place in the universe, in the cosmic scheme. Why does this happen? And why does it happen so often in patients with temporal lobe seizures?"
Ramachandran met John shortly after the episode in the desert. He was still feeling the extreme highs and lows that follow his seizures. Ramachandran was about to witness the emotional intensity that John endures.
I've been in so much pain that I'd rather be shot to death, dude, or just whipped to death.
Mm-hmm. But also
death.
joy?
Yeah, I've been in so much joy that I would rather be left alone, man. Take everything away and just let me sit there and have that much joy. I feel like I can float and stuff sometimes,
Okay.
It's like the best.
There were times where he would have 7 or 8 grand mal seizures in a day.
Mm-hmm.
He would never come back to this reality during that time. I have looked in his eyes in those times, and I have seen a cry for help.
No, I mean, you guys, that's the thing, though. A lot of other people can just walk around and see the beauty of the world. I can... Sorry.
Uh-huh.
It's not as beautiful.
he has a seizure, he'll want to talk philosophy. He'll want to discuss all the things that are floating around in this stew he's got up here that he's trying to reconstruct. Thoughts that he may have had just floating through his mind while he was in a seizure mode may come surfacing.
I see. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
but also, you said he's become more emotional because of the seizure. So that's helpful too.
much more sensitive. But oddly enough, not in regards to himself. Okay. But in regards to atrocities, disasters, things like that, anywhere and everywhere. Wrongs done to other people.
Oh my God. And you know what? I am so right in my own head. I know I could go out there and get people to follow me. Not like these wackos with sheets on their heads. Not like those idiots.
Right.
But now it's just the new generation of the prophets.
Yep.
And were all the prophets people that were flopping around on the ground? Is that what this whole message was? The gift from the gods this whole time?
That's possible, isn't it? Yeah.
I've never been religious, ever. People say, no, you can't see into the future. That's what that gift is, but you gotta pay for it by getting slammed around.
Now, why do these patients have intense religious experiences when they have these seizures? And why do they become preoccupied with theological and religious matters even in between seizures? One possibility is that the seizure activity in the temporal lobe somehow creates all kinds of odd, strange emotions in the person's mind, in the person's brain. And this welling up of bizarre emotions may be interpreted by the patient as visits from another world, or as God is visiting me. Maybe that's the only way he can make sense of this welter of strange emotions going on in his brain. Another possibility is that this has something to do with the way in which the temporal lobes are wired up to deal with the world emotionally. As we walk around and interact with the world, you need some way of determining what's important, what's emotionally salient, and what's relevant to you versus something trivial and unimportant. How does this come about? We think what's critical is the connections between the sensory areas in the temporal lobes and the amygdala, which is the gateway to the emotional centers in the brain. The strength of these connections is what determines how emotionally salient something is. And therefore, you could speak of a sort of emotional salience landscape with hills and valleys corresponding to what's important and what's not important. And each of us has a slightly different emotional salience landscape. Now consider what happens in temporal lobe epilepsy. When you have repeated seizures, what might be going on is an indiscriminate strengthening of all these pathways. It's a bit like water flowing down rivulets along the cliff surface. When it rains repeatedly, there's an increasing tendency for the water to make furrows along one pathway, and this progressive deepening of the furrows artificially raises the emotional significance of some categories of inputs. So instead of just finding lions and tigers and mothers emotionally salient, he finds everything deeply salient. For example, a grain of sand, a piece of driftwood, seaweed. All of this becomes imbued with deep significance. Now, this tendency to ascribe cosmic significance to everything around you might be akin to what we call a mystical experience or a religious experience.
For Ramachandran, John's story is the basis of one of his most intriguing and controversial theories. Could there be a specialized area of the brain that drives human beings to seek religion?
A few years ago, the popular press inaccurately quoted me as having claimed that there is a God center or a G-spot in the temporal lobes. And now this is complete nonsense. There is no specific area in the temporal lobe concerned with God, but it's possible there are parts of the temporal lobes whose activity is somehow conducive to religious belief. Now, this seems unlikely, but it might be true. Now, why might we have neural machinery in the temporal lobes for belief in religion? Well, belief in religion is widespread. Every tribe, every society has some form of religious worship. And maybe the reason it evolved, if it did evolve, is that it is conducive to the stability of society. And this may be easiest if you believe in some sort of supreme being. And that may be one reason why religious sentiments evolved in the brain.
The only reason I probably would get rid of the seizures and epilepsy, because I've never even seen them, is because of my family, because of him. I would keep them for those visions, because of the way I see the world falling into place and things like that. It's a wild little place to be stuck in there. It also seems like a key. And right now I haven't learned how to use the key without those seizures. If I was told that I'd never have a chance to have that key again, sorry, I'm gonna hold on to that thing.
Just because some patients with temporal lobe seizures have intense religious experiences, this does not in any way invalidate that experience for that patient. In fact, it can very often enrich the patient's life enormously, and it poses a dilemma very often for the physician, because what right do we have to treat the patient with medication or with surgery, thereby, in some instances, depriving him of these valuable experiences? To me, the exciting thing is that subjects like God and religion can now be actually addressed by us scientists. We can begin to ask questions about religion and God and begin to approach these questions by listening to these patients, by talking with them, and by studying them.
It's a tragic irony that today's breakthroughs in our understanding of the human brain are made possible by the misfortune of brain injury. For centuries, philosophers have labored to understand God, consciousness, and the mysteries of human nature. Now, perhaps science will have its chance.
Why I like that segment so much is that it highlights human phenomena that you can't understand on the surface. You wonder what is that about, and what's going on with the brain? Is this something that is fixable by way of neurology, psychiatry with medication, or counseling? And the question is, should we even intervene in this person's life who's having these experiences? And just taking this one segment, you can lead into a range of discussions. Look at how much of the world is at war today based on religions. We're in my follow-on, my next class in the spring will be about the Balkans. Mind you, we have people there who are intense in their animosity towards each other. They're intense because one believes in Catholicism and the other one believes in Orthodox Christianity. And what's the difference between the two? It's how they understand the phenomenon of the Holy Ghost. I mean, you wouldn't think that would be something that would ignite intense passions where people would want to perpetrate genocide to get rid of the others. And then into that mix, you bring Islam, and that, they're all in a frenzy to attack each other. And so we'll look at that at the next time. But again, to try to understand that, I think we need to look at the brain and what can go on there that can impact some of this intensity. Now, I want to bring us back to Karen Armstrong and what she tells us about the mammalian brain. And Karen Armstrong says, but sometime after mammals appeared, they evolved what scientists call the limbic system, perhaps about 120,000 years ago. Kaku adds, here we encounter the mammalian brain, or the limbic system, which is located near the center of the brain, surrounding parts of the reptilian brain. The limbic system is prominent among animals living in social groups, such as apes. It also contains structures that are involved in emotions. Since the dynamics of social groups can be quite complex, the limbic system is essential in sorting out potential enemies, allies, and rivals. The four parts of the newly added brain matter, the limbic system, perform the following tasks. The hippocampus is a gateway to memory, both long and short term. Damage to this part of the brain destroys the ability to make long-term memories and makes you a prisoner of the present. The amygdala has it's almond shaped, and that's how it got its name. It is the seat of emotions, especially fear, where emotions are first registered and generated. Then we have the thalamus. It is a relay station gathering sensory signals from the brain stem and sending them out to various brain functions. The hypothalamus regulates body temperature, hunger, thirst, and aspects of reproduction and pleasure. Okay. All of this is covered by the cerebral cortex, which is the outer layer of the brain. And as Karen Armstrong tells us, the third part of our brain, about 20,000 years ago, during the Paleolithic age, human beings evolved a new brain, the neocortex, which is home of the reasoning powers and self-awareness that allows us for self-awareness that enable us to stand back from instinctive and primitive passions. Kako adds, the evolutionary history of the brain with the reptilian brain, the limbic system, the mammalian brain, and the neocortex, the human brain. Roughly speaking, one can argue that the path of our brain's evolution passed from the reptilian brain to the mammalian brain and to the human brain. Finally, we have the third and most recent region of the mammalian brain, the cerebral cortex, which is the outer layer of the brain. The latest evolutionary structure within the cerebral cortex is the neocortex, meaning new bark, which governs higher cognitive behavior. It is most highly developed in humans. It makes up 80% of our brain's mass, yet is only as thick as a napkin. Anyway, the essence of this is why I think it is so important to understand the brain and its different functions and how it has evolved over time is one to suggest that what we currently are dealing with as a brain is only 20 to 50,000 years old. So, it's a relatively young and developing concept. And the fact that we have this ability to have rational thought or a thinking brain, which may seem counterintuitive when you flip on the news every day, but we have that capacity. It is possible. And this is one of the things that gives me hope for the future. I know we talked many times about how depressing my classes are and how the world is going to hell. And when we look at history, we find out that we as a species have been pretty bad actors. However, we do have a brain, and it can be developed further, and it can come to see some of the wrongs, and it can then pave a way for a more humane, kinder, gentler existence than what we are used to. Now, I want to show you what is being taught in schools about this stuff. This comes from the Khan Academy, which is for many people a exemplary of what is new techniques for education in primary and secondary schools, also used in colleges and universities. But I want to share with you how they're teaching this material.
I'm going to talk about gray and white matter. In the central nervous system, which is mostly the brain and the spinal cord, there are areas called gray matter, that contain most of the neuron somas. So most of the neuron somas in the central nervous system are found in the gray matter. And then there are other areas called white matter. And in the white matter of the central nervous system is most of the myelinated axons. Myelinated, so axons that are wrapped in myelin, myelinated axons. And these are actually kind of funny names for these parts of the central nervous system because they're really not gray or white. They're all kind of different tan colors in life. But when the tissue is prepared certain ways after being removed from the body, it can have a grayish appearance or a more whitish appearance. And so these are the names that have stuck for these general areas, the gray matter and the white matter. Now, the distribution of gray matter and white matter is a little different between the spinal cord and the brain. If we look first at the spinal cord here, and here we have a really nice illustration of some different sections of the spinal cord. So right over here, what these drawings represent are different levels of the spinal cord, like if we made little sections of it, like if we were cutting a loaf of bread and kind of cut from the top down to the bottom. And then we're looking down at these sections from the top, so that we're kind of looking down this way at the different sections over here in these drawings. And what we see in the spinal cord is that most of the gray matter of the spinal cord is on the inside, this kind of H shape or this butterfly shape of gray matter. And the white matter of the spinal cord is mostly on the outside, all this stuff outside this H shape.
Okay, I just wanted to give you a flavor of that. And next I want to share a TED Talk, because it's really the technology. Where do I have? Oh, I know where I have it. Hang on. It's recent technology that has given us MRIs and such to be able to see what's going on in the brain.
Hi, Let me ask you to raise your arms and wave back just the way I am, kind of a royal wave. You can mimic what you can see. You can program the hundreds of muscles in your arm. Soon, you'll be able to look inside your brain and control the hundreds of brain areas that you see there. I'm going to tell you about that technology. People have wanted to look inside the human mind, the human brain, for thousands of years. Well, coming out of the research labs just now for our generation is the possibility to do that. People envision this as being very difficult. You had to take a spaceship, shrink it down, inject it into the bloodstream. It was terribly dangerous. You could be attacked by white blood cells in the arteries. But now we have a real technology to do this. We're going to fly into my colleague Peter's brain. We're going to do it non-invasively using MRI. We don't have to inject anything. We don't need radiation. We will be able to fly into the anatomy of Peter's brain, literally fly into his body, but more importantly, we can look at his mind. When Peter moves his arm, that yellow spot you see there is the interface to the functioning of Peter's mind taking place. Now, you've seen before that with electrodes you can control robotic arms, that brain imaging and scanners can show you the insides of brains. What's new is that that process has typically taken days or months of analysis. We've collapsed that through technology to milliseconds, and that allows us to let Peter look at his brain in real time as he's inside the scanner. He can look at these 65,000 points of activation per second. If he can see this pattern in his own brain, he can learn how to control it. There have been 3 ways to try to impact the brain: the therapist's couch, pills, and the knife. This is a 4th alternative that you are soon going to have. We all know that as we form thoughts, they form deep channels in our minds and in our brains. Chronic pain is an example. If you burn yourself, you pull your hand away. But if you're still in pain in 6 months or 6 years' time, it's because these circuits are producing pain that's no longer helping you. If we can look at the activation in the brain that's producing the pain, we can form 3D models and watch in real time the brain process information, and then we can select the areas that produce the pain. So put your arms back up and flex your bicep. Now imagine that you will soon be able to look inside your brain and select brain areas to do that same thing. What you're seeing here is we've selected the pathways in the brain of a chronic pain patient. This may shock you, but we're literally reading this person's brain in real time. They're watching their own brain activation, and they're controlling the pathway that produces their pain. They are learning to flex this system that releases their own endogenous opiates. As they do it, in the upper left is a display that's yoked to their brain activation of their own pain being controlled. When they control their brain, they can control their pain. This is an investigational technology, but in clinical trials, we're seeing a 44 to 64% decrease in chronic pain patients. This is not the Matrix. You can only do this to yourself. You take control. I've seen inside my brain. You will too soon. When you do, what do you want to control? You will be able to look at all the aspects that make you yourself, all your experiences. These are some of the areas that we're working on today that I don't have time to go into in detail. But I want to leave with you the big question. We are the first generation that's going to be able to enter into, using this technology, the human mind and brain. Where will we take it?
Take us out of that. And let me, as I mentioned, we're the US and European Union have embarked on a project to map the brain just like DNA. Here's a clip of Obama's announcing that project.
Thank you. Smaller than an atom, but we still haven't unlocked the mystery of the 3 pounds of matter that sits between our ears.
It's still you on the screen.
Sorry.
Ability to study.
Okay, let me. That's what I did. I forgot to unshare. Okay. I do sound like Obama, though, don't I?
Study individual neurons and figure out the main functions of certain areas of the brain. But a human brain contains almost 100 billion neurons, making trillions of connections. So Dr. Collins says it's like listening to the string section and trying to figure out what the whole orchestra sounds like. So as a result, we're still unable to cure diseases like Alzheimer's or autism, or fully reverse the effects of a stroke. And the most powerful computer in the world isn't nearly as intuitive as the one we're born with. So there's this enormous mystery waiting to be unlocked. And the Brain Initiative will change that by giving scientists the tools they need to get a dynamic picture of the brain in action and better understand how we think and how we learn and how we remember. And that knowledge will be transformative.
I just wanted to give you a brief on that, because again, what is often the future is very encouraging and I think provides a certain amount of hope. Of course, that information in the hands of people who have ill will can also be used for making the world worse. But I think this gives us great opportunities to look at things like what we're going to talk about next week, the development of character. What makes for a good character? I'd like for you to think about that before the next class of a person, and how does that develop, and how does that change? How does the brain work in developing character? Okay, with that, let's questions, comments.
Actually, I do have a question. Is the program Obama was talking about, is that still progressing apace, or?
The one that Obama was talking about?
Yes.
Yes. The US and the European Union have invested millions of dollars to start that research. And so at universities across the world, they are conducting research to try to map the brain just like we map DNA. And other things as well. So yes, that is underway. You can I had the acronym right in front of me, but the acronym for the study itself is BRAIN. So you can go online, and I think I have some links in the materials that I sent out that you can go on and read more about it.
Hey, Margita.
Yes, hi. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So in 2006, a book called The Happiness Hypothesis by Jonathan Haidt was published. And I was in a book group where we actually read and discussed the book later on. And it was very valuable for me because it answered a lot of questions about the problems we as humanity have, whether it's personal or, worldwide, political, what have you. And what sticks to my memory is his elephant and rider metaphor. So the elephant is what we saw today, what you showed, the emotional part, the old instinctual part of the brain where we just react. And he says it's so dominant in our psyche, in our brain, that it's like a 6-ton elephant. Well, there's a little rider, our frontal lobe person, who's trying to use his rational brain part and plan. But as we can just see in the size metaphor, it's a very hard struggle. And that's why that duality of the human psyche that has been covered in literature, poetry, we have 2 souls in our breast, all of that finally made sense to me. And also what he did, which reflects on what you said today, or showed us the videos of, is he compared our brain, the difficulty we as humans have to be rational on a constant basis, as probably we all do, having self-control, etc., is because our brains are like somebody who built a car from a very old clunker and just build on. So we still deal with that ridiculous old clunker where all these new parts have been added, but it's very hard to maneuver. And I think that says it all.
Sure. You know, in looking at terrorism and how a terrorist group functions, what their goals and objectives are, what you often have is it's a small group that has come together and they're angry about some political phenomenon, be it you know, a war that occurred 50 years ago in which their families were killed, or you know, corporate interests have come in and seized their country and they're angry and they want to take it back. But they're a small group, and it's a small group going up against a much larger protective edifice. And they look to get support from the population, that they want more and more people to join them, so it's not a small group. The small group becomes a big group. And it's very difficult because people from that could make it a bigger group, they're resistant to getting involved in some kind of aggressive action where the state may take action against them and cause them all kinds of problems. And so it's difficult for the terrorists to get a following. And so one of their techniques is to perpetrate an outrageous act against their adversary. And they're doing it because they want to provoke the adversary to retaliate.
Mm-hmm.
That in that retaliation, they're going to hurt a bunch of people from that population that they want to join them. And when they do, and they anger that population, who's the population turn to want to fight back? The terrorist group. So the small group now becomes a bigger, much larger group, much more lethal. And so it's all about that. When there is a provocation, do you react right away, or do you contemplate and try to think, what will be the consequences of this act, that act, another act? And it's so fundamental, but it is, you know, each time an event raises its head, be it George Bush with 9/11 or any of the other events, the powers that be automatically have to show we got muscle and we can fight back, and wind up hurting themselves in the process.
Hey, Tim.
Yeah, I'm interested in the changes in the brain and the different functions that the different areas of the brain have, especially with respect to languages. Now, it's said that for the first 6 months of a child's life, they're synthesizing language and patterns and so on and so forth in preparation to speak. Now, I'm interested in whether the language areas of the brain change with the beginning to speak. I know the infant brain is still developing. If it changes, or for example, with Europeans that speak multiple languages, for example, Americans normally don't speak multiple languages, but some do. And I'm wondering if that denotes a physical change of any sort. And the same thing having to do with education and life's experiences. I'd be interested to find out the location in the brain and whether or not the brain actually physically changes, or if it can be monitored. I mean, they showed, you know, lifting your arm, and this is the part of the brain that does that. So maybe speaking another language, this part of the brain will light up or something. It's just something I'm interested in.
Yeah, no, I wish I had answers to that, but as the speaker in the TED Talk was saying, we're going to be able to do that. I mean, this is really what the future holds. And I think it's one of many aspects that will be able to have much greater insight into how do people learn to speak, how do they learn to think, how do they learn morals, what goes on there, how does beatings of a child impact their ability to learn, what areas of the brain get blocked off. I mean, there's just so much that is possible through what, where science is taking us, that I think it gives room for hope, but I don't know the answer to that. I like to think that we will be able at some point in time to be able to identify someone who has some dysfunctional aspect to them, someone would be someone who's just filled with rage and resentments and grievances, who can't go through a day without causing chaos for everyone around them. That someday we will be able to shove that person into an MRI and, hook them up with electrodes and fix them. Obviously, we don't have that today, but let hope survive, right?
Yeah, or scan people before they get on an airplane to see whether or not they're going to be troublemakers or they're not functioning correctly, and in which case they don't get to board the plane.
Sure.
Thank you.
It's fascinating to me. Yeah.
Nancy.
Yes, I've done a lot of reading on in the field of abnormal psychology, and a lot of the references to psychopaths or sociopaths or malignant narcissists, etc., deal with say that the people are dealing with a reptilian brain. Now, so how has that reptilian brain that I see there's still a little remnant in our modern brain take over from the section of the brain that has the emotional and so forth, so that then they all of a sudden, well, not all of a sudden, but gradually become, say, psychopathic or sociopathic or malignant narcissists, somewhere on the psychopathy scale?
Well, as I tried to highlight, is that the reptilian brain isn't replaced by the mammalian brain. They are joined together. It is, it's added to. The same with the new brain. Doesn't replace what's in the past. It adds to it. And so it's, certainly those things that would, contribute to someone being a psychopath who has, let's say, we're able to do a brain scan and identify where is that thing we call empathy, and why is it that psychopath doesn't have any, and what can be done about that. That's why I say this, where science is going, will impact neurology, psychiatry, and psychology. But it's to, mind you, what we know today is only information we've developed over the past 100 years. So it's really a science that's in its infancy.
Thanks. Thank you.
Linda.
Yes. Yeah. She answered. She asked, and you answered one of my questions. So I'll just ask you this, because I was thinking that do these people that are sociopaths just have a small area that's didn't develop, or is it all environmental that they become this way? But the other thing I wanted to ask you was, did you see the 60 Minutes show on Sunday about using targeted ultrasound to treat, typically it was to treat Alzheimer's, to get rid of plaques, but also he's starting to treat people that have drug addiction. And I think he targets the thalamus. I don't know if you saw it, but does that make sense?
Well, yeah, no, I did not see the program, but what has struck me from what we've talked about in the videos we've looked at is the idea that when the synapses, the brain synapses, make a connection on whatever it is, that the more the person keeps revisiting that phenomenon, whatever's triggering it, that they form a solid connection and the brain keeps bringing them back to it. And that if it's connected with a habit that's a deleterious habit, that what we have to do is break that connection so that they separate and move away. And so when we look at drug addiction, what's happened is the synapses have connected and they're very solid, and we really have to try to get the person dry and sober. The problem is that in a lot of treatment, we don't keep them under treatment long enough so that those connections are still there and the person is back out and they're vulnerable to relapse. We had a person from Yerkes, the brain on drugs, I believe he did a book on, and that's it. That was his point, is that we really need more time of treatment to really rewire that brain so that it is not as susceptible to relapse as it is now. I don't know.
One of the points they brought out, though, Sal, was that we have a blood-brain barrier, and it's hard to get drugs treatment drugs into it. And for the Alzheimer's, they use the ultrasound to stimulate the blood-brain barrier, and it opened up a bit. It's a semi-permeable membrane to begin with, but became more permeable, and they could put in some kind of drug or antibody or something. Otherwise, they couldn't get it in to treat, and they got rid of the plaques. And but it sounded like for the drug addiction, they used the ultrasound. Actually, it was the treatment. It wasn't just opening up the blood-brain barrier. It was the treatment. And it's very new. If you get a chance, you should watch it.
Yeah.
And
Thanks.
Very good show.
Thank you.
And it's being done, by the way, in Morgantown, West Virginia. Yay, where I used to live.
Hey, Sal, this is
Hi,
Neil.
Neil. Hi, Neil.
Hey.
How are you?
My question for you is, how can one remember certain specific events from 50, 60 years ago, as the assassination of Kennedy, the moon landing, the Challenger explosion? I know exactly where it was, what I was doing, and some details about it, but I can't remember what I had for lunch last week.
I mean, my answer is purely speculative, not founded in solid research. But what is suggested in what I've read is that there are events that make such an imprint on those neurons that it's recorded in high fidelity. I have the same phenomena. What did I do on Saturday last week? I can't remember. But if you mention some of my experiences in Vietnam, I can tell you in fine detail exactly what went on, every second of what happened. And much of that is that it is simply so profound that it's seared in that memory. Now, one of the things I find interesting is the suggestion that those intense kinds of memories can be transmitted to future generations. And so when we think about something like uh, the enslaved people who had their children ripped from them, the emotional torment that is with that, how much of that has been passed on to future generations? And so when we look at some vicious attack, some, something that hits, the news stops and all it does is cover, look at this attack that happened today, 9/11, Gaza, whatever you want to pick. The intensity of that attack, in my view, reflects the intensity of the anger and grievance in the mind of the attacker. So what is that anger? What is that grievance? Is it something that just happened in the past week, the past 6 months, 6 years, 100 years? What is it? And I think it's important for us to understand that if we're going to deal with the people who perpetrate that kind of thing and actually do something to mitigate future attacks. Because, when you have an event like that and you attack back, yes, you may, kill a bunch of your adversary and all of that, but that hasn't solved anything. You can win the battles and lose the war. And that's, it's kind of that sort of thinking to get us to a point where we actually solve problems, not simply aggravate them.
Thank you, Sal.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, any more comments or questions for Sal?
Oh, Bob Goggins.
Okay.
Bob waving his hand.
I was in the chat. Let's get
I came to the study of psychology and back in the days when behaviorism and psychoanalysis were at the top of their games. And that environmental approach argued that we develop who we are today in response to all of these experiences that we had starting at when almost the minute we were born. There was an idea.
Okay, we can jump down, but I can't leave.
Can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Just as one example, there was a concept back then called schizophrenic mother. So people became schizophrenic not because of something in their brain, but because of their interactions with certain kinds of mothers. And in the last 20 or 25 years now, there has been a great emphasis on neuroscience. And, at first it appeared to me that the two approaches were a little bit contradictory. We couldn't really integrate them. However, today, Sal, you pointed out that our brains have been developing for I don't know how many millions of years. And that development was in response to challenges from the environment. And we had those human revolutions, the cognitive revolution and the agricultural revolution, which caused us to behave differently. For example, in the agricultural revolution, we lived in communities more and had to develop more respect, etc., for the other members of our community. So I guess what I'm thinking is there's a good analog here between how our brains developed over 400 million years or whatever it was, and how our brains develop from the time we're born in response to challenges from the environment. So thus that schizophrenic mother, if there ever was such a thing, would cause certain parts of that child's brain to react in certain ways, and those behavior patterns, thought patterns, and patterns of feelings also would become permanent, so that that person now reacts to the environment in maladaptive ways because his brain has been affected by his interactions with that mother. Nobody talks about schizophrenic mothers anymore, but I used it as an example to indicate that, the environment was king back in the 50s and 60s and so forth, and it no longer is king. But I think there's room to integrate the two approaches, that brains develop in response to challenges from the environment, both at the individual level and at the phylogenetic level. That's all I have to say.
No, yeah, thanks, Bob. Part of this is that I think that if we put people in a conference room and we talk about how would we like our world environment to be, I'd like to be in a place where I'm not worried about nuclear bombs. I'd like to, be able to take a kid to school and not worry about my getting shot. I don't really care about the kids. I'm worried about me. No, it's just that, you understand? I mean, I think we can come up with a description of what would be a viable, safe, human world, okay? How are we going to get there? So, that's how my brain works, is how do we get from here to there? And what I find is that this research on the brain is opening up an avenue that heretofore seemed impossible. We may be able to identify maladies within humans that are fixable. Maybe not, but it at least offers that sort of hope that we could get to a kinder and gentler human existence, human experience than what we have. When we come out of being just a branch on the ape family and we form our own thing, our ancestors, yes, they were aggressive and yes, they had violence, but we've taken it to a whole new level.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if anything, we would do better if we could reverse and go back to being just a member of the ape family. They're much nicer. And if you read the books by Frans de Waal, who does a lot on the chimpanzees and all of that, I mean, really, as he described, I mean, I think the world of the bonobos, as Frans de Waal describes it, that's the world I want to be in. People, they're just loving each other, and it's just, it's a very, very good environment, But so, I mean, it's part of that. And this research that's taking place and the implications of it may make a better world for not for you and me, but for others down the road.
Yeah.
Dr. Bordan, do you want to have the last word?
Just one of the reasons I retired is because it's all neuroscience now. So the junior faculty comes in and they're the ones that really need to teach a lot of the courses now because it is so changed. And another point that I was thinking of was when I worked with the psychiatric population, you could just bet that the delusion that someone was having had to do with religion or sex, but mainly it was religion. And even Freud said someday it will all be curable and we'll be taking pills. So yeah, I mean, it's fascinating today. Thank you so much, Sal. And you're right, traumatic events are so imprinted that we could be 100 years old and still tell somebody what we were doing when JFK was shot. But if they asked our name, we might not know it then.
Yeah.
Yeah. And my last word would be good night, Gracie.
Say good night, Gracie.
Okay, I've asked everyone to unmute. So any last minute comments or a good round of applause for Sal?
Thank you, Sal.
Thank you, Sal.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thanks, Sal.
Hey, we'll see you next week. We're going to talk about character. No, worldview. Worldview is next week. So which hopefully will be equally entertaining.
It always is when it's you.
I hope, you know, doing a class like this, it's, you know, as I showed you my report card from when I was in junior high school, I didn't do very well in biology. So, I mean, there was a lot of red ink on that report card.
Can I say one more thing, Sal?
Danger.
Sal, can I say one more thing?
Yeah.
I went to my friends, the psychologists, whatever, when Sal was putting this course together, and none of us would touch the brain. And what Sal has done is truly extraordinary. And he is such a scholar, and I only wish that he knew it. But all of us in the field didn't want to touch the brain, and Sal took it on, and he took it on.
Well, thank you, Terry. Thank you.
It's true. It's true. Very, very. Thank you, Sal.
Well, I hope, you know, it's not too in the weeds and that kind of thing, but so that you could have a concept of it developing over time, and that, you know, where we are today, it's not a completed project. It's a work in process, and it may offer better days ahead.
It gives us hope.
That's the idea, right? Yeah.
Bob, can you stay on a second so we can show you how to do the raise the hand function?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, everybody, we'll see you next week.